we'll start with a little bit history. No.
You said we'd be talking about the EU though.
No. The fun part will come later.
What does the EU stand for then?
Caleb is leaving the room in 2 minutes. I encourage you to ask questions whenever you have some, except for Yair and Caleb. Maybe I will include Jamie later. We'll see about that. I would like to start a little bit about the history of the European Union, because things tend to come back to the beginnings of the European Union in recent crises. It is weird enough, but when we are talking about the Greek crisis, there are always references to the beginning of the European Union and some years before that. After that, I would like to talk a little bit about the institutions. That sounds boring. It is not necessarily as boring as it sounds. And after that, we come to concrete examples how the institutions work or didn't work on three major subjects. The first one will be the TTIP, Transatlantic Partnership and Free Trade. There it worked pretty well, the institutions. Then we will talk a little bit about the refugee crisis. There, the jury is still out, but probably it didn't work that well. And then we talk about the Greek crisis, where all institutions basically failed and parallel institutions were established. And we will then talk about different scenarios I presume will hold true in the future or won't. Especially there we will talk about Brexit and right-wing parties and what their influence will be in the future. So, as I said, I would like you to ask questions after every segment, basically history, institutions, and then the concrete ones. Scenarios that we can all guess together. It's a little like, reading a horoscope. It can be true, it cannot be true, but this is what I think might happen. Why do I know things about the European Union? Firstly, I'm part of one of the founding members. Not really, I was born in Eastern Germany, but I grew up in Western Germany, so Germany is one of the central countries, I would say, to the European Union. Secondly, I worked in Brussels as a lobbyist for a large energy supplier. And thirdly, I'm working in the European Parliament as an assistant at this point, and I'm covering the European topics, namely refugee crisis, Greek crisis, and TTIP. And besides that, a friend of mine and me, we are doing an internet startup on the European Union that is trying to make legislature a little bit more interesting, or at least a little bit less boring. So, let's start. The European Union started as a security for Europe, nothing else. It was the beginning was the Union of Steel and Coal. Most of you might know that. Most of you might not know how this was actually established. It was directly after the Second World War that France was starting central planning as one of the major cornerstones of their economy. And with this central planning included, there were necessary resources of Germany to fulfill those plans, and they had two wars going on during that time, especially the Indo-Chinese War, and as well it was a safeguard towards the communist bloc, I would say, why this Montan Union, as it is called, was established. So it was at first mostly a security question. The idea was if we share the means of production for warfare, namely coal and steel at that point in time, we won't attack each other that easily. So that was the beginning and the main idea. For France, it was necessary to do that, to actually fight the wars they wanted to fight, and to be sure that Germany will not have the possibility to fight a war against them. For the Benelux states, it was mostly important for Luxembourg, surprisingly. Luxembourg, as most of you know, is a country that had plenty of steel, plenty of coal. ArcelorMittal is to 50%, or was at the beginning to 50% from Luxembourg, so they had a possibility to get a marketplace. Of course, after the Second World War, the trade broke together between all those countries, and this was the possibility for everyone to get resources they desperately needed at that time. Everyone needed resources at that time, like no time before that. Most infrastructure was destroyed, especially in Germany, but to some degree as well in France. A lot in Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands was a little better than Belgium, but yeah. So the thing there was that people needed this security to know that they can actually start to build up their own communities and to fight the wars they wanted to fight, or didn't fight wars that they wanted to be fought. this is the establishment. Of course, the idea was still that there was a lot of hatred between those countries till the 1970s. France was still the arch enemy of Germany, and these were things that were taught at school. The idea there is then that just a small elite actually managed to do that. It was from the beginning on a top-down project, like nearly no other top-down project before that succeeded in that way. And this is part of the construction problem of the EU, but it's part of the possibilities we have still. Yeah.
So basically you can see this as France using Germany in order to fight its own war, and this is how they established the EU. Right?
That is at least part of the reasoning, yeah. It is as well to regain an infrastructure, an industrial infrastructure. For that you also need coal and steel. So the means of production were withdrawn from France and rebuilt in Germany, and in Germany then destroyed. So the means of production were lower at that point as well. So it's both, yeah, fighting with the war and providing securities, keeping together the small empire they still had. So the Indo-Chinese War, I hope I'm not wrong, lasted till 54. The Algerian War started at 53, I think. All those wars are you are just able to fight them if you have a functioning economy and have the possibility to build the weapons in your own country. This is at least part of the reason why this was established. And the second thing, security, if you share those primary resources.
What was the agreement?
The agreement was that you have a free trade of coal and steel, and that French companies can work in Germany, German companies can work in France to get the resources out of the ground.
Previously they couldn't do that?
No, of course not. Resources are usually pretty nationalized in nation states, and especially after the Second World War, everything was very nationalized. So the resources underground usually belong to the state. This is still technically true, but the possibilities to gather it were then given to the companies of other states, and this provided a possibility to that. So after that, we had a couple of years where France was fighting that the Montan Union doesn't grow too strong, but they agreed at the end of the day to the Roman Treaties. The Roman Treaties are considered the foundation of the EU, or of the European Economic Community, as it was called back then. The idea there was the aim of the Roman Treaties is incredible considering the time. The main aim of this treaty is an ever closer union between the peoples of Europe. And this is at a time where it was 10 years after the war, basically. That is at least the present plan. 13 years, so 58 it was. Those Roman treaties marked actually the foundation, and you see that lots of elites actually had the idea of a Europe that is growing together more and more. I think nobody at that point in time could imagine what that means. Some of them imagined a world where there will be a reunited Europe, but usually they were perceived as fanatics at this point in time. The thing there is that you have a free economic zone where you can actually do all what I described with coal and steel. With most goods, and this is still the main function of the European Union. Everything or most things that they are doing when it doesn't come to civil liberties, is that they are trying to establish things via the internal market. The internal market and that nation states are not allowed to distort the internal market is one of their main aims. That sounds wrong. This is the weapon of choice against the member states, basically, and this is what it still is. So, firstly, we had the establishing security, internal and external security of the member states. After that, we had the implementation of the internal market. This internal market thing, I think everybody agrees, works pretty good. We are not coming to the euro yet, but the internal market actually lead to way more links between all the member states and all the countries. Then we had basically the idea that not that much was actually happening. Some countries got into the European Union, namely Denmark, Ireland, and the beloved UK. All those countries got in the UK with plenty of struggle. Pretty sure Jamie knows that. At the beginning there was more or less an invitation and an offer that was withdrawn by the European Union, and then at the second attempt just the UK got in. So the UK was a little bit anti-European, and Europe was a little bit, or continental Europe was a little bit anti-UK from the beginning. And this, we can still see these fault lines that were there at the beginning, they still hold true till today. The thing then is that we just had this single market, and the single market was greatly working for all the time during the Cold War. That was basically the main idea. Except for the Schengen Agreement, 85, we don't make all those distinctions between Schengen countries, so for example Norway is in there and Switzerland is in there, but let's just assume we are talking about Europe at large here. This is the first step towards civil liberties. So the idea that you are catering to your citizens, to the citizens of Europe, and that they firstly get rights as a European citizen. Those rights were established in '93 by the Maastricht Treaty. The Maastricht Treaty, for the first time, established the idea of a European citizen. Being a European citizen comes with plenty of rights. You have the right to sue for the European Court of Justice. You have the possibility to sue in front of several other courts. You have, when you are a European citizen and you don't have an embassy of your own country in the place where you are, you can go to any other European Union embassy and ask for help them, and they have to provide you with help. And those, you probably know that most of those rights go way further, even when it comes to covering healthcare to a certain degree. The country should help you to provide the same level as it is providing to your citizens. There's still some problems somewhere, but mostly that holds true. And this is the step from just purely economical area to the European Union as more than just a free trade zone. At this point, it really is becoming a political institution that is providing rights to everyone. And this, yeah?
Why are all these other countries added in? Like, what are the interests that are present there, and why are they going to more than just like an economic treaty?
That really depends when they came into the European Union. So, for example, Spain and Portugal, after two dictatorships, needed to have actually access to the Western world to a certain degree. So, the Franco dictatorship really cut most lines as well for the civil society and for trade to a certain degree as well, and it gave them the possibility to come back into the Western liberal societies and provided people there with the possibility to partake in the European project. When we come to Northern Europe, it is more difficult. They were prosperous, but there the idea was mostly economic gains at the beginning. When we are talking, and this is the next step after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War, we have different interests. But again, one of the major aims is to be part of that Western society. Yeah.
Why does Germany want to accept them in? And the other states?
This is that's the crucial question of the 90s. The 90s were an incredible age for the European Union. From a purely economical zone, they became what they are today to a certain degree. It is the idea that everybody was pretty optimistic after the end of the Cold War, and it was presumed that we, with Bush, need a new world order. Most countries in the European Union presumed that they were too weak alone as a player, but with a European Union that is large enough that they have the influence on the world market or in this new world, that they can actually hold up to the challenges of the time. This is why most of the Eastern countries got into the European Union in 2004. But before you come into the European Union, you have to cater to certain criteria. I think it's 22 chapters that are described in the Copenhagen Agreement, 94, 93, something like that. But all of those countries wanted in. They wanted, after the Cold War, wanted firstly the security of the European Union, internally and externally. Russia was pretty unstable at that time, and if you are from the Baltic states, it provides you with security being part of the European Union. When you are Poland and you are pretty close to Germany, then yeah, you give up some of your liberties to construct your country, that is true, but at the same time you get full access to a market and the people get full access to human rights. And at that time, Europe was doing actually pretty well. It had growth rates around 3 to 4%, even the Western European part, so it was willing to cope with all those problems. and was saying, yeah, we need this to actually invest in a more stable future for all of us. Part of the yeah, okay, maybe.
Mentioning the military agreement, is it equivalent to what NATO does? That if one of the member states is attacked, then the others must help?
There is common foreign and security politics in the European Union, but no, it is not. But most countries are NATO member states, except for Austria, I guess. Right?
Austria.
Yeah, Austria is not, but I think all others are part of the NATO. But it is implicit that. Are you thinking about Bulgaria or Romania?
Yeah.
They are, I think. So all of those countries. So it is not per se a security agreement, but it is an implicit security agreement. When you are that closely interwoven, then it is assumed that you have the protection of the European Union. But this is not. I think this is part of the reasoning behind this. But I think the more important part is that you have access to the market and that you have the possibility to access all consumer goods, economic growth. And at the first years, this was true. So the economic growth of Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, it was remarkable. It was in the 2 digits. So this was the optimistic period when everybody thought that we will become ever more European, so that this ever closer union between the peoples actually could fulfill itself. And then there came 2 things basically. Firstly, we have to talk about the establishing of the euro, and secondly, the Iraq war. Both of them were dividing Europe to a certain degree. So establishing the euro was, I'm not quite sure if most of you know that, but an implicit condition for the reunification for Germany. Germany didn't actually want the eurozone that much, but it was the idea that the D-Mark was probably the strongest currency. We had in 1990 there was the European the ECU, the European Common Currency Unit, and it was a system of fixed exchange rates between the countries. George Soros at that time attacked firstly the pound, and after that the franc, and as well the Swedish krone. The Swedish krone could defend itself. Both other currencies had to devaluate rapidly. After that, it was agreed. It was for France a beacon of security actually to have the euro. The UK, in their unlimited wisdom, decided that their own currency might be better. That might be true, because when we all. I don't want to go too much into currency theory, but the idea is you probably need, when you have a common currency, either a transfer system or, to a certain degree, fiscal responsibility. So everybody knew that at the beginning, funnily enough. So that's why this fiscal responsibility was the idea of the European Union to tackle the problems that can come with a common currency. The problem was that in 2004 and 2005, Germany and France were not doing that well. They were above the 3% deficit line, and as they were still the strongest members of the European Union, they were basically convincing the Commission that it's not such a big a deal if you don't keep to those 3%. This is why after that, more and more countries were in times of crisis, and we had a couple of crises after that, especially the crisis of 2008. This wasn't considered as a red line anymore. And
what was the cause? Sorry, what was the cause of Germany and France's financial straits at the time?
Germany's problem was that's a pretty good question. Unflexible labor is usually considered, so unflexible labor laws were considered too high of social taxes, and not sufficiently liberalized market. This is what usually is considered one of the problems. Sometimes, and this is my theory, economies are just not doing that well, and we are looking for reasons. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe it was, some countries have sometimes such a bad time. So I don't know. In France, it's the usual problem: high wages in a competitive market. It's usually a little bit problematic, as well as the structure of the economy that is still very state-directed and has plenty of huge companies that are semi-monopolies in France, which is a little bit problematic. Was problematic, and is to a a certain degree still problematic in the country for the economy. It is probably better for the workers and it's good for the workers. That's why they are defending that. But that is why the 3% mark didn't hold up at this time. Then we have the Iraq War, and the Iraq War pretty divided Europe, the old Europe and the new Europe, if we want to use those terms. Countries that followed the US and countries that didn't follow the US. This is still a line, those are still two power blocks to a certain degree in the European Union. Not actually because it has anything to do with security, but the one bloc is more in favor of a liberal market or a liberal European Union, and the other bloc is more for social security and, let's say, more regulations to a certain degree. So UK, Poland are usually fighting together, the Czech Republic as well, when it comes to having less European regulation, whereas France and Germany are usually rather in favor of more regulation. This is not true for everything, but it is, by and large, those are two power blocks that still exist. The two different other two power blocks established during the Greek crisis. This is basically countries with a high deficit and countries with a lower deficit. France being somewhere in the middle, but besides that, you know all the countries. Portugal, Spain, Italy to a certain, Italy definitely, Greece, Ireland with not that much of high public debt, but high private debt. Those countries were then in favor of more, as some call it in the European Union, solidarity, and that the people that should work together. The idea of Eurobonds is pretty much interwoven with that. The countries that were at this time better off and were providing the securities, namely Germany, Netherlands, Luxembourg to a certain degree, Finland especially, but as well countries who had used harsh austerity measures to actually fight their crisis, like Slovenia, like Slovakia. They were rather against European bonds. The one part, the, let's say, richer part, was in favor of it because plenty of people just didn't want their taxes raised or didn't see the reason to pay for other countries. And the other countries like Slovakia, Slovenia, wait a second, I have my list here. The Czech Republic to a certain degree as well, Estonia, Lithuania not that much, but Estland as well. They went through harsh austerity measures to actually fight the crisis, and especially the southern countries perceived it as very unfair that they should provide a standard of living that, in their perception, is above their own standard of living. So, from Slovenia, you will often hear the argument that it is unfair for them to guarantee Greek bonds if their minimum wage is lower, if their pensions are lower, and if their general standard of living is lower. There are arguments in favor and against that. You can say that in Greece, the standard of living, the dropping standard of living is usually for people way worse than having a low standard of living that is slowly raising. So it's not just about the level, but about the development as well. Secondly, when you're looking at the price level in Greece, it is higher than in Slovenia, therefore that might be justified as well. But those are the power blocks when it comes to the Greek crisis. So where are we today? We have today the third problem, and the third problem, yeah?
You said that there are austerity measures in countries in the European South. Are they considered to be successful?
Yeah, they are. So Slovenia is considered successful. Portugal, to a certain degree, is considered successful as well. Spain, semi-successful. But Estonia was considered a success story to a certain degree. That was hard for the country, but they went through it. It really depends what you mean by perceived as success. If you ask the left, it's probably not a success because the population goes through hard times during those austerity measures. Social security is getting cut back, and all those things lead. I cannot tell you if it's a success or not, but it is perceived by plenty of European officials as a success. I would say that. The next thing now we have is the tackling, firstly, what is the place of the European Union in the world after 2014, 2015. This is one of the pressing questions at this point in time. That's why TTIP is one of the things I want to talk about. Secondly, how we deal on a social level as a European Union. This is why we talk about the refugee challenge. That's also that as well. The refugee situation in Europe at this point. And we have to talk a little bit about Greece as well.
You mentioned that the Iraq War was a split in the European Union. How does this manifest itself? Like in what way are countries split and how?
Firstly, that it is a mentality, I think, as well. So that you have this idea: we are the new uprising Europe that is liberal, and the others are we are the Western, Northern Western Europe is more like the old Europe that just wants to stick to Brussels and this monolithic bloc to a certain degree. But secondly, but it manifests itself through the lack of interaction. So concretely, nobody knows the High Representative of the European Union for foreign policy, right? So Lady Ashton, pretty much everybody still knew, but the new one, does anyone know who she is? Yeah, you see, this is the problem. It is not possible to have a common Muhigini is her name, Francesca Muhigini, I think. The thing is, nobody knows her, and she doesn't have the power that was actually invested in that office. The idea was that the European Union can speak in the world with a common voice when it comes to diplomatic problems. And the Iraq War led to a certain degree in a mistrust in this ever happening, because when you're talking in one of the most important wars for Europe, about that it is highly divided, then it's getting way harder to talk with a common voice when it comes to future questions. And you can see that it's rarely happening that the European Union is engaging internationally, militarily, or even humanitarian aid. It is to a certain degree European, but not to the degree they hoped for in the 90s and early 2000s.
What were the country splits? Where did the country split?
I need my card for that. Germany, France stayed out. Poland got in. Czech Republic got in. Slovenia was in, I think. Austria, of course, stayed out because that's their thing. Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria weren't involved at that point in time. Romania and Bulgaria weren't even member states. I'm not quite sure about Finland, but I think Finland stayed out. Correct me if I'm wrong. But they are... so, Ireland and the UK, of course. So, the thing we should talk about a little bit is the institutions. I know it is not the most tempting part, but it is not unimportant. In my opinion, the European Parliament is one of the most democratic parliaments there are. I don't know many parliaments where the parliamentarians have more power than an MEP. So there are 751 MEPs at this point. All those MEPs, nobody actually is looking at them that closely. So, and they are changing their vote, and there is not that much of a party line. So a lot of them are actually voting along their consciousness. And that's actually a pretty interesting dynamic. That means that you need to argue a lot in the committees. The committees are actually writing a big deal of the laws in the European Parliament. So the idea is, of course, you know that every member state is sending its representatives, mostly along party lines. Those parties then re-engage in the groups in the European Parliament. But those groups in the European Parliament are pretty loose. So when you compare the German CDU with Orban's leading party, then you won't find that many similarities between them. The similarities between the SPD and the CDU are way closer than the ones within the groups. And this leads to less of a fraction unity, and this leads to more freedom for every parliamentarian that they can vote as they seem fit to a certain degree. That gives lobbyism a higher chance, that is true as well, but it gives interest representation as well a higher chance. So, the main problem is not the structure of the European Parliament. I think that's fine, and this works actually pretty well. It's the idea that parliament or a democracy cannot be built without the civil society behind it. And this is where we have the main problem at this point. So nobody is perceiving the European Union or European Union politics as a European issue. I think most people and most things that I get to know in the German parliament, this is true as well, I'm wrong in other states, it is perceived as European politics and what does it help my country. So when we are talking about emission quotas of cars, Germany, that is usually pretty pro-green, will always be against this. Which is a little bit weird, but we are driving big cars and we love them. Every policy is just debated, every European policy is usually debated in a European context. And when you're reading about European politics, you rarely read what it helps other countries, like France, like, okay, Greece is a special case, but Italy, Finland, the Netherlands as well, Bulgaria, Romania. You rarely read what those measures are doing for those countries. You are usually reading what is this measure doing for you. This is part of the problem. You don't have a common civil society and you don't have a common media that is covering it. You always have just the national angle from which it is covered, and this is to a huge degree problematic, and this leads to decisions not being taken for the good of the European Union, but always as a summation or a compromise between the individual goods. And you have that to a certain degree in every country, and this is clear to me, but you never have it that extreme, those special interests as in the European Union. First you, then you.
Is there any underlying reason for the fact that what you said that people, parliament members go with what their conscience tells them and the party doesn't force them to vote for something else? I mean, why is it that in most other parliaments that we think of, that doesn't happen and it does happen within the EU?
The thing is, parties are way stronger in other parliaments. You have, I think, 150 parties in the European Parliament. And when you have a parliament with just 2 or 3 parties, or a parliament with 5 or 6 parties, they of course have a stronger responsibility towards them. Secondly, they are under less scrutiny. I wonder, does anyone know his MEP? I'm looking at the people I know that there aren't actually that many. But the idea is nobody knows their MEPs. Nobody know who they are. So there is not that much of scrutiny by the electorate in comparison to national elections where you have that a lot. And I would say that is part of the reason, and as well because everybody's doing it. And the groups are not that important, as I said. There's always sitting one in front and raising his hand up or down, how they should vote, but when you are looking at the results, you always have like 10 to 20% dissenting votes in every block. And that is actually a lot. You usually don't have, I know for German MP it's a lot if you dissent like 3 times in the whole election period. Yeah.
What means does the European Parliament has to enforce its decisions on members? If the country doesn't want to comply with certain decisions, does that happen?
So they are the legislative branch, it's not the executive branch. The executive branch is partly the European Commission, partly the European Council. Now, the Council of the European Union. So the thing is that you can always sue in front of the Court of Justice of the European Union. And then the member states are obliged to do that, and they, in most cases, actually do that or pay fines. So they have the possibility to do that. Besides that, like in every legislative branch, it's really hard. So it's the question: how does your parliament enforce things? Usually through an executive branch, right? But yeah, there are other possibilities. Secondly, you have so this is the political sphere that is, in my opinion, rather well integrated. The MPs talk a lot with each other. The European Parliament is a marvelous place to look at. It is great to see people working in 24 different languages and trying to get a consensus about something. That if you see all those interpreters, it is impressive. And how this discourse works, even with all the barriers that are between the countries, it is impressive to a certain degree. Because one thinks of the European Union as people who are to a certain degree alike. But when you are actually sitting there, you realize that they are mostly not. Still in the parliament, they work rather well together. For that.
Can you give some examples of that?
laws that the European Parliament has passed that are considered generally a good idea?
Consumer standards everywhere, so most of the consumer standards are European-wide. You have that against all odds the European Union was abolishing ACTA. The question is what is good in a political field is a little bit difficult. You know?
Things that European citizens mostly think of as, oh yeah, that's it.
That's it. The question is, do you see those or do you not see those? I think European citizens don't consider those projects usually European projects, and that is the problem. When we are talking about the trans-European transportation network, so you have plenty of roads that are connecting all European countries, and they are highly funded by the European Union. You have nobody sees that, and basically nobody knows about that much. But it is actually a thing that helps commerce, that helps individuals. You have the same for the train network. You have the same for the electricity network. You have regional funds, huge regional funds that are helping countries to develop when they are less developed. We can do that maybe later. You have, to a certain degree, I would say even the coming agricultural policies are good. There are high subventions and they are problematic, maybe not that much into it, but they have rather high standards internationally when it comes to sustainable agriculture. Rather high, not the highest, but they are pretty high, and you just get your subventions when you comply to those standards. What else? Mobile phone tariffs. That's the thing Europeans like most, I think. I think you don't pay more at this point than 19 cents per minute in every European country, and to 2016 roaming charges will be to a large degree be abolished as well. It's the small and simple things, but this is where the Parliament usually is working. It's the small and simple things, the everyday life where it's working. The huge crisis, and this is what I want to come next, is where the European Parliament and the European Council, the Council of the European Union, damn it, those are two. Let's come to the institutions first, just to make that clear. There are, I think, 7 institutions. Some of them are not that important, like the Court of Auditors. We don't talk about that. But there is the European Commission, which is something like the government or the executive branch. Then we have the European Parliament, which we talked about. We have the Council of the European Union. This is the place where all member states are assembled, and they are, according to their population, get a certain number of votes. But it is decreased, so you get less than your population. Small countries still get more proportionately than large countries, but large countries absolutely have more votes. Germany has at this point. But so this is where the countries are working together, and this is where national interests are usually represented mostly. They are represented in the Parliament as well, but especially in the Council of the European Union. The Council of the European Union should not confuse with the European Council. That is something completely different. Not really. It's the highest body of the European Union. Tusk is at this point the president. The Council, the European Council consists of all heads of states, prime ministers, or who's leading the government in that country. They are usually firstly presenting guidelines and can override basically everything that has been done, which they usually don't do. But the possibility is when the possibility is there. So this is actually the leading body in all important questions. It was the leading body in the Greek crisis, and it was it is now the leading body in the refugee situation.
Most of these bodies require majorities to pass rulings, but some of them require unanimity.
Mm-hmm. That depends on the field we're talking about. So when we're talking about simple legislation, then simple majority is enough. When we're talking about some new fields, then you need a 2/3 majority. I think this is, need a second, somewhere. The list is longer. So you need, of course, unanimous decision when it comes to changing existing treaties and when it comes to enlarging the field of the European Union. But in the European Union, research and technology development and coordination of economic, employment, and social policies, and common foreign policy, I think, require a 2/3 majority. If you want to check that exactly, you can look it up in the Maastricht Treaties and in the Lisbon Treaty. Nobody wants to. But the interesting thing is that the European Parliament works pretty well when it comes to small nitty-gritty things, or even larger things like the transatlantic trade agreement, where nothing is really pressing, you have plenty of time, and you can actually debate a lot. There the European Parliament is working pretty well. So we have plenty of changes in this free trade agreement in comparison with the CETA agreement, which is with Canada and was the first common trade agreement. All those things are really important to plenty of Europeans, and especially Germans. They go nuts about that. The thing there is that in those cases, I would say the European Union works pretty well when it comes to the small side, stuff like roaming charges, like agricultural subventions. But when it comes to big things where you need to react fast, the European Union can just not do that. I'm not quite sure if you could use that in debating, but usually a legislative process needs up to 3 years, which is not enough in a world that is changing as fast as the one we are having. There are exemptions, but they are very rare. And when it comes to urgent matters like the Greek crisis or the refugee situation, you usually don't have more than a month, sometimes days in the Greek situation, sometimes months. And there you need an alternative body. And this alternative body is usually either the Eurogroup meetings for the Greek crisis, because the UK doesn't have that much of a say, and so does Denmark and Sweden, and that's agreed upon with most people there. They are usually firstly the ministers meet, so Mr. Schäuble is, I think, widely known in Israel at this point, and widely hated around Europe, and widely loved around Germans. He's the most popular politician, even passing by Angela Merkel at this point, which is crazy. Just a quick excursus, crazy guy. He was writing the reunification treaty between Germany. He was the victim of an attentat, that's why he's sitting in a wheelchair. And after that became an interior minister, which I still find surprising for a victim of an attentat, a terrorist attack. That's at least surprising. He was highly involved in a bribing scandal of his party, and became after that the finance minister. So
we have no idea what that's like.
What?
We have no idea what that's like.
Same with you. No, but it's great, and he's still the most beloved politician in Germany at this point in time. So we have a sense of humor to some degree.
In fairness, he went to jail, so he's obviously not great at it.
Oh no, ours was better. He didn't know that those existed, even though he was, in charge of the treasury, which is at least unlikely. He just found 200,000 euros somewhere. That's basically his story. So, but besides that, we have then other institutions that are surpassing the established institutions, and this is probably the only way it works with so many member states, that you cannot go through all the process and then that you need agreement. So, and now when it comes to institutions, I want to talk about one important thing, and this is that I personally don't believe that solidarity at this point in Europe exists. I think it's a buzzword that we are using, and that we should use as often as we can in the European Union, because maybe then it will get through at some point. But when you look at the negotiations, solidarity is very rarely the case. It's you give me something, I give you something. And this is why two things are very important in the European Union. This is the agricultural subventions, and those are the regional funds. This is basically the mass you can use very often in negotiations. You get more agrarian subventions for some countries or for some circumstances, and for that you get an agreement to something else. So the same for the regional funds. Underdeveloped areas in the European Union get rather high subventions. This as well helps to negotiate with countries that are rather reluctant to comply to European standards. We are looking at Orban in this case, to help him make his decision easier, let's say it that way. But it is not that many countries are doing something out of solidarity. I have rarely seen one case. One might argue that the last Greek package, the last help program for Greece, was an act of solidarity to a certain degree. No other helping package for Greece before that was. That was all mostly self-defense for the European Union and for the common currency. At this point, most economists agree that Europe is stable enough that they could deal with the Brexit. But I think no politician at this point wants his name attached to a Brexit, because that would lead probably to not a humanitarian crisis. That's a little bit too harsh, maybe, but something very close to that. And you don't probably want to be the politician that is attached to that. Even Trump doesn't want that. But I didn't get the impression that solidarity is actually a thing when you're looking at the greater question. It's usually what gives me votes in my next election at home. The European parties, or the parties that are in the European Parliament, always consider their nation state more important than the European Union. Probably they are right, but this is one of the reasons why they are not looking that much for European support, what they are doing. They are usually just looking for national support. So I think right now we are at the next step, and the next step is the question, do we actually want this solidarity at some point? And that's one of the major questions we have to ask ourselves, and this is where I come to scenarios later. Firstly, I want to talk, I think the Greece crisis, we can a little bit talk about that. TTIP, I'm not quite sure that interesting for most of you. The Greece crisis is interesting because it is portrayed, at least in Germany to a certain degree, that Germany was helping Greece, which is not accurate to my knowledge and to the knowledge of most people. It is just providing help against the collapse at this point. It was nothing else. Saving European banks so that the banking sector doesn't get completely broke. After that, it was a little bit more difficult. Then it turned a little bit more into helping programs for Greece. And at this point, it is not about saving banks anymore. It is about the idea that we want Greece to stay in, or most countries want that. The question is, just 5 minutes left?
Yeah.
That's great. Whoa. Nah, then we don't talk about Greece. Then we talk a little bit about the scenarios, and I think that is actually interesting. Do we have a pen? We don't have a pen.
Yeah. No.
Okay. So I think there might be 3 scenarios for the European Union. The one thing is maybe a steady decline to a certain degree. So what we are seeing now is the Euroscepticism that is rather strong in most countries. When we are looking at the Netherlands, I think your right-wing party is around 70% at this point. France, they are at 26% and are at that point the largest party. Was a recent poll. Finland is around 15%. Greece is around 10% with Golden Dawn. Germany has 2 newly established right-wing parties. They are not that strong at this point, but it is presumed that there is a potential for a right-wing party of around 20%. So a Eurosceptic party, not a little less xenophobic than you might think when you hear German right-wing party, but mostly xenophobic. No, not xenophobic, but anti-European. In Finland and Denmark, we already have right-wing parties in the government. So all over the board, except for the Hispanic island, you have right-wing parties. And the question is how does the European Union deal with that? And how do the Conservative Party especially deal with that? The UK and France, the Conservative parties are leaning now more towards the right. Because they have pressure from that people that they were always considering their electorate. Other countries just try to ignore them. I'm not quite sure if that works. But if this Euroscepticism, and your question was asked by plenty of people, what is the European Union actually doing? And the answer is a lot of small things that are actually a good idea. And some large things where you can make yourself a lot of enemies. This is what the European Union is doing at this point. So the small nitty-gritty stuff people tend to not see that much, but it is actually a good thing that, in my opinion, is helping the European project to a certain degree. The large projects, this is the question the refugee crisis is basically asking. Are we a solidarity community? Is it more than just a political idea where everybody can gain something? and the different countries answered that differently. This is the idea that Orban is basically saying we don't want that. Till yesterday, I would have said UK is taking the same stance. I think till yesterday they accepted 500 refugees from Syria, but France accepted 250 refugees from Syria. This is the right-wing pressure I was talking about to a certain degree. Germany was accepting 80,000. No, way more at this point. We are at 60,000, and it is assumed that we get an influx of more than 200,000 at this point. Syrian refugees. Yeah.
I have a question regarding the refugee situation. Maybe it's a bit naive, but
No.
okay. So I'm trying to understand why. I mean, you see all those refugees trying to get to Germany through sea. Sometimes tragedies happen.
Yeah.
And there are other countries in the region that can also like try to get some refugees into their countries. Also Arab countries who have money, who have the means to do so. Like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all those countries. Why is there no like pressure from the European Union on those countries to try to help in the situation?
Qatar and Saudi Arabia, I didn't accept a single refugee. I think even with Syrian refugees, it is pretty difficult in Israel as well. I think they are providing help abroad, but not in Israel itself, right? The thing is, for this, you need a common foreign policy. And we don't have that. We don't have a powerful common foreign policy. Germany could engage directly probably with them, or France could, France probably not, but Sweden or Austria to a certain degree could do that. But since there is no common European foreign policy, in my opinion, or powerful one that is powerful enough to convince people, this is up to the nation states, and it is not possible actually to come with a compelling argument when we are talking about Slovenia that I think took in 200 people, but just if they are Christians or something like that. So there is no common policy.
As long as they're not Muslims. It wasn't.
Oh.
You don't need to be Christian.
Oh, yeah. So sorry.
Jews, it's all good.
Great. Yeah. No, but that's the thing. I think you have no common ground and no common position to negotiate. And it is true to a certain degree. There is a pull factor. So the Syrian refugee problem is there for a longer time. It is not a new thing. But there is now this new pull factor by Germany and Austria to a certain degree. So everybody is seeing the pictures of the Bucharest train station, of the Munich train station, of the Vienna train station. They are incredible, and I'm for once really proud to be a German. But there is a pull factor to that, and there are, I think, in Lebanon and Turkey, there are around 1 million people waiting, and they don't know what to do at this point, and there will come people after that. And the thing is, I think it's a good thing, I think it's a great thing, and Europe should show this solidarity, and I see no reason why Germany couldn't take those people and why Lebanon has to take them. It seems to me not plausible. Same for France, but this is the question: do we want to be that union at this point? And if we don't want to be that union, then we will have a hard time to explain to people why we need solidarity at all. So if we're not in the face of the worst crisis that we've seen in we've seen plenty of crises in Europe, but recently, when we are not engaging there together, then I don't know where we can actually achieve the solidarity. And there are steps towards it. So the UK is at this time to a certain degree on board. Sweden is working a lot. Even Iceland wants to take people in. Italy and Greece are doing more than their share at this point. All those are things where you can actually help each other. The question is, do you want to do that? And if you want to stick to that old position that you just want to cater to your own electorate, then that's probably not going to work. Yeah.
Can I say something very short on the refugee crisis? I heard that in 2012, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey did a secret treaty to topple Bashar Assad, and then these two countries support ISIS against Bashar Assad, and one of the Saudi Arabia and Qatar didn't accept any refugees, but Turkey, it's also in the treaty, take 3 million refugees, but not to be seen like against the Syrians, like
No. Yeah,
to be seen sympathetic against Syrians, and according to Turkey's no-autonomous policy, but the real like the real responsibility is just because of these three countries like bad aims.
The problem is that it's a little bit oversimplified. I don't want to go into the details of the Syrian war at this point. It is true that Turkey is accepting, I think, I think it's a little bit less they accepted, but they are not getting asylum. They are just there as guests of Turkey, and it is presumed that they get back to Syria as soon as possible. Nobody in a sane mind would think that is happening in the next 4 to 5 years. I don't think that it's going to happen. It might be happening, but I don't think that. So this is a long-term crisis, and that needs long-term solutions, and the Turkey solution is probably not a long-term one. This is why people go to Europe or Central Europe, because they think this will drag on for a couple of years, and we need a home for that time. But this idea of the pull factor, and that people are still either in Libya waiting to get into the European Union or in Turkey waiting to get into the European Union. Together with the pull factor is the question, how do we solve this crisis? And we cannot solve this alone, because when one country is solving that alone, it will spill over to other countries. There's no way this is not going to happen. The question is, can Europe cope with that? I think there might be a chance. When there's a chance, I presume the best idea is to say everybody is taking basically as much refugees as they can. Those who don't take refugees have to pay a fine. This was a proposal by Tusk as well. I think it's a rather smart one. It's a little bit like the first Gulf War, where Germany didn't want to participate but therefore had to pay a lot of money. You can probably do that. You don't have to, but this is a proposal. But the question is, if you solve it that way, then you have a European Union that is directly standing against the right-wing parties. This is why I'm bringing that up. So this is then us against them. So the right-wing parties are anti-European and anti-refugees, and we want to be another union, and therefore there is a possibility that we move on with that union. So this is one possibility. Or we have a European Union that is breaking on that question. This is the idea that conservatives then are catering more to the right-wing parties, and you have then the problem that conservative parties catering to right-wing parties are usually very anti-European. We see that to a certain degree in the UK with the Brexit. We see that in France as well. And those, if the UK is going out of the European Union at one moment is losing 20% of their GDP. They are a strong force in Europe, even though in Brussels they are not always liked. It is an essential part. And France, I'm just saying, it might happen in 5 to 10 years. That we will have a very anti-European sentiment there, then the European project will not just stall, but go back. And then we have the problem that there might not be a European Union as we have it now, and this is the peak of the responsibilities of the European Union. May or may not be so. I think this is a unique opportunity for Europe to actually say that we are more than just a trade union, or a union that is providing civil liberties for us, but actually a union that is providing a common solidarity, and that is giving the feeling of solidarity, because I don't think that most Europeans have this feeling at any point. They just perceive themselves as firstly part of their country, French, Dutch, English, Romanian, and after that maybe some elites perceive themselves as European, but actually nobody is doing it in that. But having a common question to one of the most important questions of this decade might actually help to have that. And Germany had once the wrong answer, in my opinion. I don't think that Germany reacted according to what I perceive as the Europe I want to live in the Greek crisis. I was pretty sure that Germany has no possibility to actually revive the European project in the next 5 years, but it worked in just 6 months, in my opinion. So we have now another question, and this question might be solved in a way that is actually helping towards a more European Union. And this might actually help to solve the wounds that we cast in the Greece crisis. Maybe, maybe not. But the question is, do we work together with the rights, or is the European Union standing against the right-wing parties? If they're standing together against the right-wing parties, the European Union has a future. If the conservative parties are catering too much to the right-wing parties, I don't see a future for the European Union as we have it now. Okay. Any final questions?
You say you were born in East Germany, but your brother says why?
What does my brother say?
That you guys were from West Germany.
So firstly, my brother was born in 92. I was born in 87. And we moved directly to Western Germany after the birth of my brother.
So he's lying.
My brother never lies.